All right, welcome to the download. Today I'm joined by Les Williamson, Managing Director of Citrix A. Les has been in the industry for a very long time, at least 25 years experience. He has a passion around corporate cultures and also around mobilising workforces. So today we're going to talk a little bit about that and maybe some other things too. Les, mate, thank you very much for joining us.
Great to see you, Ronnie. Thanks for the invite.
So tell me, you've been around for a while in our industry. You previously were running Cisco here in ANZ.
Yeah, that's right.
And now Citrix. Why did you choose Citrix?
Yeah, great question. I had a 3-year, 1 month and 4-day break after 15 years with Cisco, and before that 15 years with Ericsson, so I thought I needed a break, and the timing was right. And when I was looking around to come back into the industry, Citrix opportunity, couple of things: change agenda, needs to grow, needs to be different, needs to be more relevant to the Australian market. They're the sort of things that get me passionate. I think it's an undervalued brand in the Australian marketplace. I think the portfolio's in the right place for what enterprises and businesses need to be doing. I just felt I needed a little bit of help to take that next step to high growth.
So it brought you out of retirement too, hey?
I wouldn't have called it retirement. My wife certainly didn't call it retirement. I probably did internally. If you've never had a long break and you can afford to do it, and I couldn't afford to do it for 3 years and 1 month, but I did.
Right.
I really enjoyed it. It allowed me. I was always pretty connected to my private life and to family, but it really allowed me to get deep into some other passions, get a bit of distance to leading big teams, big business. Can bog you down a little bit sometimes. You can lose a bit of perspective of what's real and what's needed to be authentic, in your life. And really, I just had such a great time.
That's brilliant. And so now you've been with Citrix now for how long?
8 months and 22 days.
Okay, not that
I'm
anyone's
a
counting.
counter. Not that I'm a
I
counter.
don't see any counting there. 3 years, 4 months, 1 day. And so in that time, you sort of came in because you saw the opportunity, etc. How have you embraced that opportunity, and what are the sort of some of the things that you're seeing happening now?
Yeah, look, like with everything, from an outside perspective, you get certain perceptions, you get certain. I mean, Citrix is a brand that's been around for 25 odd years. Certainly, being in the industry, I had my perceptions of what that brand was. I suppose what's exciting is, like I said before, the portfolio I think is in the sweet spot for what enterprises in Australia and New Zealand are needing. They need to be more productive. They need to connect people both internally and externally, and they need to, you need to be able to get access to the things that can make your work easier and faster.
Right.
Citrix is in that sweet spot. So being in the, under the hood for 8 months, I can see that the portfolio's in good shape. Really, it's our execution and how we go to market and how we're talking to the marketplace. I think being a fairly old brand, you get stuck in your ways of how you want to connect to the marketplace. I mean, you've been through a few transitions. I think Citrix is going through a different way to embrace and talk a more business relevant message, and that excites me. It means different skills in the team. Needs a different articulation to the market, needs a different channel, and hopefully a better way of doing business.
Oh, so I can see some of the excitement there for you in joining. So Citrix is also moving now to way more of a cloud-based. I mean, everything's going cloud, right? What would an interview be if I wasn't talking cloud?
Yeah.
So let's call it software as a service, which is really how Citrix is pivoting there. How are you seeing Citrix becoming relevant in that space now?
Cloud's always been, it's an interesting thing, cloud, isn't it? It's an overused term. Australian customers have embraced, public, private cloud. To me and to Citrix, it's just a delivery mechanism. And look, for the time being, and probably for the foreseeable future, it's a fantastic delivery mechanism. But we don't certainly overplay that. It's the way to deliver productivity improvement and new ways of working. So yes, Citrix has embraced the cloud. We've embraced any cloud. We're actually cloud agnostic, and that's another great thing that I'm enthused about joining the brand, is that there's not too many software companies that can stand and say all our products are cloud delivered. And by the way, they can be on any cloud. They can be from Microsoft, it can be from AWS, it can be your private cloud, it can be a mixture. And I think that, as a delivery mechanism is very powerful because it allows for that flexibility, agility, a low operational entry cost, all those things I think are goodness for customers. So, that's why we're still relevant in a SaaS-based world, as you said. We're the front door to all those applications, wherever they are. If they're on-prem, if they're in the cloud, if they're from your public cloud, if they're from a private cloud, if they're based on AWS, if they're based on Google, if they're based in Azure, it really doesn't matter. We're that front door that gives a consistent user experience, obviously secure, and obviously independent of device that you're accessing. So to me, I think that's an exciting place to be.
Definitely. So I think security is a really interesting angle. I mean, there's again another sort of part of the industry that we're in now.
Yeah.
How are you seeing Citrix's play in security? Obviously, with a Cisco background as well, there's a lot of security knowledge that you have, and how are you seeing Citrix's play in that, and the market adoption of your play in that space?
I think, as anybody watching this well knows, security is a broad subject, ever changing, and any single vendor that says they've got the 100% solution, I'd suggest you go and talk to other vendors because they're not telling you the story. And the same with any partner. I think partners have the best ability to represent a full security portfolio, but the customer's got to play a huge role in that as well. So even there, it's got to be a collaborative effort first and foremost. So Citrix is part of the security solution. Where our portfolio is at the moment, again being cloud-based, we see a perimeter-less security story. So we're not trying to tie down a device, we're not trying to tie down a network layer, as in my previous career. But we're ambivalent to whether it's device, whether it's network layer, whether it's application layer, and we're also ambivalent to whether it's on-prem or in a virtual environment. So whether it's when you're working from home or whether you're from mobile. So our security portfolio allows us to have that perimeter-less view. Like I said, we're a component of it. We do from device to application to data storage, and we allow transparency of encryption. From the full access of a user accessing apps and data in your corporate database, in your corporate servers. But really, it's that concept of not being tied down to a particular area.
Right. And so now I was reading an article just. I think it may have been at about 5 o'clock this morning, actually, about millennials and how they're going to operate very, very different. Well, not millennials, but the new generation,
Absolutely.
Babies that have been born now or kids that are coming through school now, some of whom are struggling even to know what a mouse is, etc.
Yep.
How are you seeing, and what's your view on that sort of mobile workforce and the work from anywhere and how Citrix enables that? We know that's been Citrix's play for a long time, right? Allowing people to work from anywhere, and that's now becoming a much more prevalent thing in the market. How are you viewing the future of that?
I think there's a couple of things, and Australia's right in the hotspot. From a leader perspective, from a human perspective, I mean, we're in an amazing area. If you think in the next 10 years, there's going to be over 1 billion people entering middle class. So from India, from China, Indonesia alone, 1 billion people will be entering what the Western world views as middle class, i.e. educated, multilingual, consumption-based, and seeking, either got the economic or political freedom to consume and to decide. That's an amazing shift in the people-nomics of our region. And when I reflect on Australia as a country, are we, as our policy debates and our discussions, even at a corporate level, embracing that shift in what's going to happen with the workforce. Now, not all those people are going to come to Australia to live, because home is home. But what are we doing as enterprise? Are they a threat to us? And if so, what are we going to do to combat it? Because they may change their purchasing decisions, which will impact Australian businesses. They may not look for Australia for what they're currently looking for, and they'll be able to build it themselves. Or is it an opportunity for us to embrace that as a workforce and to help with our own productivity and improvement? So at a macro level, there's that. And then couple that with your initial question around millennials. For the first time, every workplace in Australia, we've got 5 generations that we've got to cater to.
Yeah.
Well, from baby boomers right down to the millennials and everything in between. And some of us fit in that in between generation shift. So I've seen a massive change in the way that technology is deployed, because those different generations consume it in a totally different way. I mean, a millennial will not watch a half-hour video on how to learn an internal system or Salesforce.com or whatever your key business process may be. They will tune out after a couple of minutes, and the mere fact that they think they have to be trained is abhorrent to them, and they'll go somewhere else. They won't leave the company, but they won't focus on that. They'll go and do something else. So just simple things like how we internally enable people has to be different, whereas I'm quite comfortable watching a 15-minute, 20-minute, but, it's how I was brought up. If you want to learn a system, you go and do a little bit of training and then you start accessing it. But millennials are consuming that in a totally different way. And, of course, if it doesn't work first time, they'll just go and download it off off the dark web or off, go to a different repository and get the data elsewhere. And, it's bringing in a whole lot of different workflows and technologies for that. So, again, to bring that back to the Citrix world, I think that consistent and targeted user experience depending on where you are in the workspace, and I won't go as far to say where you are in that generational mix, but certainly how you want to consume that data, that application. There is a level of flexibility and agility now in the portfolio that allows for some of that.
Right.
And I think Australian businesses have to do more of that. I see far too many workforces where it's just, one laptop is the way, or, you might be able to choose between a Mac or a PC. I don't think that's evolved to where it needs to evolve. And the same with the work environment, the physical workspace, we continually need to evolve that.
But I think that's where Citrix plays well as well, right? Doesn't matter if it's Mac, doesn't matter if it's PC, doesn't matter if it's iPad, doesn't matter if it's a Samsung Galaxy Tab, doesn't matter what it is really, because as you said previously, it's like that gateway, right? That open it up and let people in, it doesn't really matter.
Absolutely, it's that front door, device ambivalent. We need to know about it, but we take all that complexity and do that in the back end, because we're delivering different experiences if you come in through an iPhone, or if you come through a Galaxy, or if you come through a Mac, or if you come through a tethered terminal at a branch. We're delivering different experiences. It's the same user feel and look, but it is a totally different technology experience. But we're hiding that. We're doing that in the cloud. We're doing that on-prem. We're doing that in different ways. But you're quite right. We don't care, and that's a good place to be.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we've built at Insentra, as you're well aware, we've got our what we call predictive insights and analytics, which realistically is end user productivity as a service. Because I think that's another area where we're seeing a big view in the market is actually not just what are my users doing, but how are they operating with the technology? Are they getting the most out of it? And what's the performance like right at the endpoint?
Yep.
And what's that user experience? Because when you get to the millennials, you're right. If that experience isn't great, then they're just not going to
they're off using a non-approved app, and you're losing productivity. Actually, it's interesting, right? I've just been around Australia and New Zealand, spoken to about 850 mix of partners and customers. My main talking points was around productivity and Australian and New Zealand businesses in particular. We're not in the shape that we need to be, even though at a macroeconomic perspective, we've had 27, consecutive quarters of growth at a GDP level. But our enterprise productivity has stagnated. And I think in part that is the way that we're working, and the lack of embracing new ways of working inside many enterprises, small and large, probably more to the middle and large end. And it was very much around, I think the IT industry and players like Citrix and players like yourself probably need to step up a little bit more and be more connected to that end user experience and deliverable. And if, enterprises want a few things. They want operational efficiency, they want productivity improvement, they want shareholder and stakeholder success. We need to be tying our capabilities to those outcomes a lot more. And, I do feel we've all got some ways to go to progress there. I think other industries are ahead of us in doing that. I think the IT industry is playing catch up on that. And I think some of the less successful players out in the market, probably experiencing that very directly because customers are talking. Yeah, if you're not tied to my end user experience, my end user productivity, my goals, well, I'm just not going to be spending CapEx and OpEx on you.
That's the thing, right? There's just not a lot in it anymore. And I think because there's so many offerings around and it's so competitive, it's not that difficult to change. And when people are out in the cloud, it's not that hard to pick up and shift and move to something else. And that's why we built this service, right? Was to ensure that that the IT organisations can deliver that to the business and say, well, this is actually what's happening, and this is the way it is. I mean, the concept of the boiling the frog.
Yep.
Right.
It's like, doesn't know until it's too late.
Exactly, and so often leadership, what we've seen with with some of the implementations we've done, is that the leadership doesn't even know because the end users haven't worked out that things are just gradually getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And being able to identify that and do something with it is really important. Yeah. And I think that often enhances the Citrix story too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, partners like your good self, that is critical for us to stay connected, because you have got that reach to that pointy end. Yep. I mean, where they're setting preference, but you're dealing with it on a daily basis. It's what your SLAs are tied to. Mm-hmm. But I do see us as an industry moving closer to that as an overall delivery model, rather than just certain players doing.
No, I think you're right. And look, that's the I think from our perspective, with our partner-based, same as yourselves, being able to take those solutions into the partners and letting the partners take that then enhances the story, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So tell me, at the moment, what are you? What's the book you're currently reading?
I've got a couple on the go, though my wife challenges me because I'm not reading enough novels. I was reading some novels when I was off, so I've dropped all that. But a couple, I've got one at the moment called Machine, Platform and Crowd, which is a new, it's actually quite a groovy title. But it's really talking about, we've got so much data now, we've almost got too much data, a lot of false positives, a lot of, negative negatives, and, we really don't use enough of that data for the right decisions, and the human interface sort of takes over probably a little bit more than it should, and we're probably not making the optimal decisions. So this book is around both a leadership principle, but also how organisations can attract the power of crowd knowledge, merge that onto a platform that's accessible to all, and how you incorporate artificial intelligence and database decision making and data decision making into driving productivity and outcomes for businesses. All encompassing.
And a different read.
It is a bit of a different read. I don't know why it came across my radar. I'm intrigued with how humans process data. I'm a gut feel leader and decision maker, which is not a great place to be, and that's why I have some very good data-driven people around me and that know how to run the spreadsheets, because the power of the two of those, I think, is where it's all about. Yep. And it's not just the two, it's multiple, but I'm interested in that, and I want to get less away from gut feel decisions, leverage data decisions, but add that human flavour to it, add that human characteristic to it, because we can override some of those data decisions, and we need to, but then couple that with the power of this crowd, whether it's your internal organisation, whether it's your partner community and your end users. I think we've got a long way to go in how we embrace that and how we capture that and use it for good business decision making. Okay. So this book goes a little bit into that. I must admit I got a bit bogged down about chapter 3, but anyhow, I'll get through it. But
and is that a book you'd recommend to people to read? Or if you had a book that you could recommend that would, be a great book?
Yeah, look, I'm probably, to be honest, I haven't got through most management and leadership and business books. I tend to read the first 4 chapters and the last 2 chapters because I find them a little bit repetitive, to be honest. But Geoffrey Moore's always someone, not so from a leadership or behavioural, but from a strategic, where to place your bets, how to view market transitions, how to read where markets are going and where you need to position your either messaging or your portfolio. Geoffrey Moore's always been someone that I've tracked. He's written quite a few, Crossing the Chasm. Chasm was a great book, So I tend to keep track of where his writing's going to, but, I'm a Harvard Business Monthly subscriber, so I just keep on track of some of those articles. I like the short form.
Yeah, I like those too. There's a lot of value out of that. Yeah. And essentially, you talk about like in the short form and how you read the first and not the last. One other thing that's interesting about you is you hate email, right?
I'm not an email person.
So tell me about how does that work in the corporate environment?
Yeah, well, it probably doesn't, and people would probably suggest that I'm living in a bubble. But yeah, I've sent one email to every team member in Citrix, and I've been there 8 months, and I've only sent one email, and I think that's pretty good. And that email was to say, I will no longer send you another email, and please communicate through a collaboration platform. We use Slack.
Okay.
So that was what that email was for, and I have not sent another one since, except for calendar invites. When we have to send. So I've never been. Probably 8 years into my leadership roles in Cisco, my previous company, I stopped using email as a communication tool as a leader, and I was just upfront with everyone as I am now, and I just say, look, I'm immediate with SMS and WhatsApp. I'll give you an hour turnaround on that if unless I'm with a customer or a partner. But I'm best effort with email. So if you don't want me to answer for a couple of weeks, send me an email.
Interesting. And how does that work at a global level?
Yeah, tricky because not everyone subscribes to that way of working. So obviously, I'm selective in who I respond to, and I have to also respect that. Not just in hierarchy, but some people, that's how they want to communicate. Now, certainly as a customer and a partner, you'll never get me, ringing you saying, please don't send me an email. That you choose how you want to communicate and I'll respond. But internally, I've had some pretty interesting discussions with head office about, I didn't respond to that because I don't do email. And, I said, well, I communicated that to, a lot of people. There wouldn't be too many people that don't know that Les's communication form doesn't include email as an immediate response. So, of course, I respond to emails, but I'm just not on it.
Okay.
When I wake up in the morning, I don't go to Outlook or my email client.
Mm-hmm. So you go to Slack.
I go to Slack.
And
I'll stay on Slack for quite some time before I'll even go to my inbox.
And why do you find that to be more productive?
I find it...
Not speaking about Slack.
No.
Slack,
yeah,
just
a collaboration, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And look, I've actually... I like Slack, but it's probably a little bit clunky. It comes from the engineering ranks, but I just find the conversational value, so I can go back and get a historical read very quickly of the context, what's been going on. I find those collaboration platforms make people type and articulate themselves a lot faster and a lot clearer, whereas emails I find too verbose and people live behind them and they become glossiers. And I find it abhorrent that they send it to 25 people and then CC another 35 people and start a conversation. I just don't find that an effective way. Whereas with Slack, you've got various channels. You can, say, well, this is for general, fun stuff. This is for hardcore sales. This is for hardcore tech. So I can go and seek the conversations that I want to get engaged in or find important, and I get the notifications around those conversations. So I find that a much better way to communicate to a lot of people and get a lot of people's thinking clearly articulated in a quicker time than a whole stack of emails with attachments and conversations going off. I just do not find that effective.
That's fascinating.
And but you've got to work at it. And like I said, every morning I don't open up my email client, and at night the last thing I do is go through Slack. I don't go through my emails.
Brilliant. So
some people would suggest that's not so brilliant, but it's helped me. Well, it frees up my time. I prefer to communicate to a lot of people and my leaders and anybody for that matter in that conversational manner on an online platform. I like the historical. We can go back at your own time and look through, and I think that's really important. It's very hard to do that in emails because it gets a bit tedious. And I've just it's just part of my shtick, I suppose.
What I think is really fantastic, when I say brilliant, what I think is brilliant is that you've actually, working in a global organisation, you've, for want of a better word, trained, but you've got the global organisation, you're respectful of it, but have got them understanding it. You've brought that into your team here. You're trying to do something different. You're trying to bring in a different way to work. Yeah. It's worked for you over the years.
It has. 8 months in, I think there's some people inside Citrix that probably haven't clued into that yet and probably wondering why I haven't responded. Yeah.
Well, if they're watching this, they're now going to know.
I'm sure there's a few people from Global saying that new bloke in Australia is hopeless. He doesn't answer email. But look, the team, if you polled the internal team in Australia and New Zealand, I think they'd suggest, I'd say probably 60% are tuned into it. 40% have got some way to go, including some of my leadership group. I mean, there's still a leader, and I know who they are, has not embraced that as a communication platform. And, I'm very passionate about it because I do think it's a clearer, more articulate, more immediate way to communicate. And I think people hide behind email too much, whereas a collaboration platform, it's a bit more like a social platform that people are used to. They're short, they're sharp, they're direct. And I think that's the way we need to connect. So anyhow, we'll give it a go.
So
the jury's
that's
out.
going to be tip 1, right? I'm going to come in a second.
Yeah, that's probably a good
I'm going to
tip.
come to 2 other tips that I want to get from you that you might give to people that would make a profound impact on themselves or their organisation. But before I do that, just an interesting question.
Yeah.
Craziest food you've ever eaten?
Craziest food? I've heard a bit of, because I used to look after Asia Pac, so I've eaten...
They're often Asian answers that we
live octopus out of a tub in Korea. That was pretty exciting because you have to chow down pretty quickly, otherwise the tentacles get stuck in your esophagus and that ain't good. I've eaten more parts of a pig in Vietnam than I probably want to admit to, but I'd say I used to live in Sweden. I lived in Stockholm for 3 years in the late 80s, and up in the northern parts of Sweden, where it's dark for 6 months of the year and then light for 6 months of the year, they have this delicacy called surströmming. It's called sour herring. And it's basically a Baltic herring coming out of the Baltic Ocean. It's not a very big fish. And they put a little bit of salt with it. Actually, they put a lot of salt with it. And they bury it in a can for about 6 months to a year. So it ferments. And it gets the most pungent smell. In fact, I think I'm still right in saying there was a global odour analysis done, and this is the smelliest food on the planet when you open it, and it has hurt people just through the toxicity of the smell. But yeah, chowing down on surströmming is probably the most exotic food. I wouldn't say it was the most delicate of food. It gets very acidic after 6 months to 12 months in a tin, buried and with the salt around. But it's an interesting thing, and when you're up north of...
So you had it once?
I had it twice, actually.
Twice,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah. There's a town up in north called Kiruna, and it's a pretty famous town to Swedes for a couple of reasons. One is their surströmming, and the second, they're addicted to hotted up cars.
Okay.
I mean, this joint's like it's up in the middle of nowhere. It's not too far from Lapland. And like I said, 6 months darkness, 6 months light. They're all a bit loopy, but they're addicted to these cars, and they drive around when it's 24 hours daylight. They drive around the town square in these hotted up cars, which is, you don't quite associate with Swedish culture at all, and that's why they're up north.
Are they all Volvos?
Yeah, no, they're actually, no, they love the big Ford thing. I am going back a few years. I don't know whether they've evolved, but yeah, they love chowing down on surströmming up there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
All right, so let's come back to the 3 top tips that you'd give somebody, and then I'm going to let you get back to your day.
Cool.
So the first one is maybe use email a little bit less and try to use a collaboration platform.
Yeah, I'd say as a leader, just try getting back some of your time, but more importantly, giving your team back some time, and just notice the behavioural change in communication when email is not the preferred way to either put across a message or start a conversation. Yep. I've found it certainly evolves the level of content and the directness of communication.
Okay. And 2 other tips that you might have that'll make a profound impact that people could have either in their organisations or personally.
Yeah. On the organisational leadership, I think, if you're a leader at whatever level, medium level or senior level, I think our job is to bring the outside into organisations. So I think a tip is that just look at your meetings, the way that you're connecting internally. What are you doing as a leader to bring the outside world into that discussion? So are you bringing other customers? Are you bringing market views? Are you bringing partners? Are you bringing frustrated customers and partners into that conversation? I'm a big believer that, my role, I should be spending 60-70% of my time bringing the outside world into the internal Citrix world, because you can make that all of your world, and that's clearly not what's going on out there. So my tip 2, make sure you've got that balance over-rotated to bringing the outside in. And then maybe on a personal tip, if you can afford it, both from a time perspective, but also from a financial perspective, having a break between gigs, whether they're internal gigs or whether they're external. I don't believe in this myth that if you drop out 6 months, 12 months, that you're going to be a lesser value to another organisation when you try and get back into the market. Clearly, you've got to keep your hooks in there if that's how you want to progress your profession. But I think getting distance and from corporate life is a good thing when you're immersed in it most of the time.
I had the pleasure of doing that a couple of times in my career, and I totally endorse what you're saying. Being able to get out and take a breath and see what the world is really about, reconnect with your family, reconnect with yourself. I think it's very powerful.
And you see a lot about corporate mental health issues, and I think it doesn't have to be defining, and it doesn't have to be you've drifted so far that you have to pull the plug now. But I think I've seen enough people in my team and in other teams that I've led that left it too long to get a bit of distance, or were just too aggressive and too 150% subscribe to what the company was asking them to do, and that's not a great place to be.
No, never is. Les, mate, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on the couch with us.
Good on it.
And lovely to have a chat, and thanks for sharing some of your wisdom with us.
No worries.